It starts on a storm-soaked night behind a roadside diner when a tired worker finds two drenched shepherds welded together by fear and something else. The shelter wants them split. A smooth-talking stranger shows up with shiny papers. The dogs snarl if anyone pulls them apart. Then a sudden collapse, a trembling body, a soft press of a muzzle, and a clue that doesn't match the story they were sold. Doors slam. Threats follow. A locked room. Smoke, and a hidden past that could ruin the people who helped, or save them all. If tearing them apart is procedure, what would you risk to keep them together? When the reason they refuse to let go might cost you everything. Through the diner's rain-streaked windows, Nell Vale watched sheets of water pour from the dark sky. The storm had started just before sunset and showed no signs of letting up. Thunder crashed overhead, making the glass rattle in its frame. She wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night, her arms heavy with fatigue. The diner was empty except for a truck driver nursing his third cup of coffee in the corner booth. The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., almost time to close up. "More coffee, Jerry," she called out. The trucker shook his head and pulled out his wallet. "Better get back on the road before this gets any worse," he said, leaving a generous tip. Nell gave him a tired smile as he zipped up his jacket and headed out into the downpour. As she collected his coffee cup, a particularly bright flash of lightning illuminated the parking lot. That's when she first saw them. Two shapes huddled beneath the back steps. Nell squinted through the rain-blurred glass, trying to make out what they were. Another flash revealed two German shepherds pressed tightly together, their fur matted and dripping. They looked massive, even crouched down as they were, trying to find shelter from the deluge. Nell's heart clenched. She couldn't leave them out there in this weather. Moving to the kitchen, she found some leftover meatloaf that was headed for the trash anyway. She grabbed an umbrella from behind the counter and stepped out the back door. "Hey there," she called softly, holding out a piece of meatloaf. "It's okay, you must be hungry." The dogs raised their heads, watching her with intelligent eyes. One of them, the slightly larger one, gave a low whine but didn't move. The other pressed closer to its companion. "Come on," Nell coaxed. "I won't hurt you." Slowly, the larger dog crept forward, followed immediately by its partner. They moved as one unit, never more than inches apart. As they came into the light spilling from the kitchen door, Nell could see they were both male and remarkably well-muscled, despite their bedraggled state. Their faces bore nearly identical white markings, though one had a small scar above his eye. They accepted the meatloaf gently from her hand, sharing it between them. Nell noticed they wore no collars, but their coat. Condition suggested they hadn't been strays for long. "You poor things," she murmured. "Where did you come from?" Thunder boomed again, making her jump. The dogs pressed against each other, trembling slightly. Nell knew she should call animal control. It was protocol for strays. But something about these two made her hesitate. The way they stayed so close, protecting each other. It reminded her of herself and Marcus, her late husband, how they'd faced everything together until cancer took him 3 years ago. Still, she couldn't just leave them out here. With a sigh, she pulled out her phone and made the call. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the rain as an animal control van pulled into the lot. A young officer stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Evening, ma'am. You reported 2 strays?" "Yes, they're over here." Nell led him to where the dogs still huddled by the steps. "They seem well cared for. Maybe someone's looking for them?" The officer crouched down to examine them. "No chips or collars. We'll check for missing dog reports, but they'll need to come to the shelter for now." He reached for the larger dog with a catch pole, but both animals immediately backed away, pressing even closer together. When he managed to loop the pole around one's neck, the other dog growled, not aggressively, but with clear distress. "Interesting," the officer muttered. "They're completely bonded. Sometimes happens with dogs who've been together a long time." He tried again to separate them, but they remained unmovable, each refusing to go without the other. "The shelter's pretty full right now," he said, straightening up. "We might have to send them to different facilities." Different facilities? Nell felt a sharp pang in her chest. But they clearly need to stay together. The officer shrugged apologetically. "Not much choice, unless—" He glanced at his clipboard. "We do have a foster program. If someone was willing to temporarily house them both until we can find their owners or suitable adoption." The words were out before Nell could stop them. "I'll do it." "Ma'am, these are large dogs. They'd need space, exercise." "I have a fenced backyard," Nell said quickly. "My son's been wanting a dog anyway." She knew she was being impulsive, knew her landlord would have a fit, but she couldn't bear the thought of these loyal friends being torn apart. The officer studied her for a long moment, then held out his clipboard. "There's a temporary foster form here, but please understand, this is a serious responsibility." Nell's hand shook slightly as she signed, but her voice was firm. "I understand." As if they comprehended what was happening, both dogs moved closer to her, their tails wagging slightly. The larger one nuzzled her hand while the other pressed against her leg, soaking her uniform pants. "All right then," the officer said, helping her load them into her old station wagon. "Contact the shelter if you have any issues. We'll be in touch. About finding their owners." Nell watched him drive away, then looked at her new charges in the rearview mirror. They sat pressed together in the back, their eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her shiver slightly. "Well, boys," she said softly, "let's go home." As she pulled out of the parking lot, the rain finally began to ease. She had no way of knowing that her simple act of compassion would lead to events that would test her in ways she never imagined. For now she was just a tired woman with a soft heart, driving home with two grateful dogs who refused to be separated. The drive home was tense, with Nell stealing glances in her rearview mirror at her unexpected passengers. The larger shepherd, she'd started thinking of him as the scarred one, kept his head lowered, while the smaller dog pressed against him protectively. Their breaths fogged up the back windows as rain continued to patter against the roof. Pulling into her driveway, Nell's headlights illuminated her modest ranch house. The front porch light was on. Tyler must have remembered to leave it lit for her. She took a deep breath, wondering how her 15-year-old would react to their temporary house guests. "Come on, you two," she said softly, opening the back door. The dogs stepped out carefully, staying close together as they followed her to the front door. The moment she opened it, Tyler looked up from the couch where he sat playing video games. "Mom, you're late again." "Whoa!" His controller clattered to the floor as he spotted the shepherds. "They're just staying temporarily," Nell said quickly, holding up her hands. "I found them at the diner. Animal control was going to separate them." "Mom!" Tyler's voice cracked with disbelief. "Mr. Peterson's gonna flip when he finds out. You know the lease says no pets." A loud car backfired outside, and the larger shepherd dropped to the floor, trembling. The smaller one immediately pressed against him, making soft, whining sounds. "Oh." Nell knelt beside them slowly. "It's okay. You're safe here." She noticed the bigger dog's reaction wasn't just fear. His whole body had tensed like he was ready for action, despite his obvious distress. "I think I'll call you Ranger," she murmured. "You move like a soldier." The smaller shepherd looked at her with intelligent eyes, still pressed protectively against her companion. And you? Nell studied her gentle but alert demeanor. Vesper, like an evening star, always watching over him. Tyler crossed his arms. You're naming them now? Mom, we can't afford dogs. And what about… Just for a few days, Nell interrupted. Until animal control finds their owners, or a good home for them both. I couldn't let them be split up, Ty. You should have seen them at the diner. Her son's expression softened slightly as he watched Vesper trying to comfort Ranger. They really stick together, huh? Like they can't bear to be apart. Nell stood up, her knees creaking. Help me find some old blankets for them? They made a makeshift bed in the living room corner using worn comforters. Nell filled a mixing bowl with water and scrounged up some leftover chicken from the fridge. The dogs wouldn't eat until she set the food down and stepped back, giving them space. Watch how they share, Tyler observed, his initial resistance fading into curiosity. They're super polite about it. They're well trained, Nell agreed. Someone must be missing them. After eating, the shepherds settled onto their blankets, Vesper curled slightly around Ranger's larger frame. Their eyes followed Nell's movements as she tidied up the kitchen and got ready for bed. Try to get some sleep, she told Tyler, who was still watching the dogs with fascination. School tomorrow. Yeah, okay. He hesitated. Mom? Thanks for helping them. It was a good thing to do. Nell smiled, touched by his words. Sometimes her son surprised her with moments of maturity that reminded her so much of his father. She tried to sleep but found herself listening to the occasional shuffling sounds from the living room. Around 2 a.m, a different noise drew her from her bedroom, a sort of muffled whimpering. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, Nell saw Ranger twitching in his sleep, making small, distressed sounds. But it was Vesper's response that made her breath catch. The smaller shepherd had shifted to press her body against Ranger's chest, her head tucked under his chin. She was making soft, soothing sounds, almost like humming. Ranger's trembling gradually subsided as Vesper continued her gentle comfort. There was something so tender, so deliberately nurturing about her actions that Nell felt like she was witnessing something private. This wasn't just 2 dogs who happened to travel together. Their connection went deeper than that. What happened to you two? She whispered to herself, watching as both dogs finally settled into peaceful sleep, still wrapped protectively around each other. Returning to her bed, Nell's mind raced with questions. Ranger's reaction to the car backfire, his military bearing despite his anxiety, the way Vesper seemed trained to respond to his distress. These weren't ordinary strays. Their bond felt almost human in its complexity, like partners who had faced darkness together and emerged with an unshakable loyalty to each other. She pulled her quilt tighter, knowing she should be worried about her landlord, about the expense, about the responsibility she'd taken on. Instead, she found herself feeling oddly privileged to witness the depth of devotion between these 2 remarkable animals. Whatever their story was, she was starting to suspect it was far more complicated than she'd initially imagined. Morning sunlight streamed through Nell's kitchen window as she poured herself a second cup of coffee. She hadn't slept well, her mind churning with worry about the 2 shepherds currently curled up in her living room. Tyler had already left for school, but not before sneaking the dogs some of his breakfast bacon. The sharp rap at her front door made her jump, sloshing coffee onto the counter. Through the peephole, she saw Mr. Jenkins, her landlord, rocking back and forth on his heels with barely contained agitation. "Miss Vale?" he began the moment she opened the door, not waiting for a greeting. "The neighbors called about dogs. You know the lease specifically prohibits dangerous breeds." Nell's stomach dropped. "They're just temporary fosters, Mr. Jenkins. It's an emergency situation." "German shepherds?" He peered past her into the house, where Ranger and Vesper had risen to attention, watching the door with alert eyes. "Those are restricted breeds. Insurance won't cover them. They'll have to go immediately." "Please," Nell said, stepping into his line of sight. "Just give me a few days to find them a proper home. They're well behaved, and I'll take full responsibility. You can't afford the extra deposit I'd need, even if I wanted to make an exception." Jenkins crossed his arms. "You're already late with this month's rent." Heat crept up Nell's neck. "I told you. I'll have it by Friday when I get paid. And now you're taking in dogs you can't afford?" He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vale, but if they're not gone by tomorrow, I'll have to start eviction proceedings." Before Nell could respond, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, his shoes gleaming despite the muddy street. Something about his practiced smile made Nell's skin prickle. "Mrs. Vale?" He approached with measured steps. "I'm Rexall Green. I believe you found my dogs." Behind her, she heard both shepherds let out low growls. The man's smile didn't waver. "I've been searching for them since they escaped during transport last week," he continued, pulling documents from a leather briefcase. "I run a specialized breeding and rehabilitation program. These two were being moved to separate evaluation facilities when they got loose." Nell accepted the papers with trembling hands. Everything looked official. Veterinary records, ownership documents, transportation permits. But something felt wrong. The dog's reaction, for one thing. And the way this man spoke about them, like they were inventory rather than living creatures. "Separate facilities?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, unfortunately necessary." Rexall straightened his already perfect tie. "The male has shown concerning aggressive tendencies. He needs specialized rehabilitation. The female will be placed in our breeding program." "They can't be separated," Nell said quickly. "You should see how bonded they are." "With all due respect, Mrs. Vale, that's precisely the problem. Their codependency is unhealthy. Professional evaluation requires individual assessment." Mr. Jenkins nodded approvingly. "Well, there you have it. Problem solved." Rexall produced a leather leash. "If you'll just allow me to collect them." He stepped past Nell into the house. The moment he reached for Ranger's collar, both dogs transformed. Their previous growls became deep, warning snarls, teeth bared in unmistakable threat. Vesper positioned herself between Ranger and Rexall, her usual gentle demeanor replaced by fierce protectiveness. Rexall stepped back, his polished facade cracking slightly. "This is exactly the behavioral issue I mentioned. They've become dangerous." "No," Nell said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "They're not dangerous. They're protecting each other. And I won't let you separate them. I have legal ownership. Then take me to court." The words tumbled out before she could second-guess them. "But I'm not handing them over to be split up. Not today." "Ms. Vale," Jenkins sputtered. "You can't—" "I'll have your rent on Friday," she told him, "and I'll figure something out about the dogs. But right now, these gentlemen need to leave." Rexall's practiced smile had vanished entirely. "This is a serious mistake, Mrs. Vale. You have no idea what you're involving yourself in." "Maybe not," she agreed. "But I know what feels right. And this doesn't." She stood in her doorway, heart pounding but spine straight, as both men retreated to their vehicles. Only when they had driven away did her hands begin to shake. What had she done? She couldn't afford a legal battle. She could barely afford next month's rent. Behind her, she felt a gentle nudge against her leg. Vesper looked up at her with those intelligent eyes, while Ranger pressed close to her other side. Their earlier aggression had vanished, replaced by a warmth that made her throat tight. "What am I going to do with you two?" she whispered. But watching them together, the way they moved in sync, the absolute trust and devotion in their body language. She knew she couldn't have done anything else. Whatever their story was, whatever trouble she'd just invited into her life, her instincts told her these dogs needed to stay together. And somehow, she was now part of their story, too. A familiar white truck pulled up just as Rexall Green was getting into his car. Officer Boone Carver stepped out, clipboard in hand, his weathered face set in its usual expression of tired resignation. The late afternoon sun caught the scuffed badge on his animal control uniform as he approached, squinting against the glare. "Got a call about a disturbance," he said, glancing between Nell and the departing vehicles. "Something about dangerous dogs?" His voice carried the flat tone of a man who'd responded to countless similar calls, expecting this one to be equally routine. "They're not dangerous," Nell said quickly, her fingers unconsciously curling into fists at her sides. "They just didn't want to be separated. You should have seen how they panicked when he tried to take just one of them." Boone sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. The lines around his eyes deepened as he frowned. "Mrs. Vale, I thought we were clear about this being temporary. If the owner's shown up..." His gaze drifted towards the dogs watching warily from behind Nell's legs. "Something's not right," she interrupted, stepping forward on the gravel driveway. "You saw how gentle they were at the diner. They only got upset when he tried to force them apart. Ranger was shaking, Officer Carver, actually trembling." "That's not our call to make." Boone flipped through his paperwork, the pages crackling in the breeze. "If he's got proper documentation..." He paused, thumb hovering over a form filled with Rexall's immaculate handwriting. "Then give me time to verify it." Nell stepped closer, lowering her voice until it was barely audible above the rustle of nearby trees. "Please, your animal control. Don't you want to make sure they're going somewhere safe?" Her tired eyes held his, refusing to look away. Boone's expression flickered. In 15 years on the job, he'd gotten used to following procedures, keeping things simple. Fill out the forms, process the animals, move on to the next call. But something about this situation nagged at him. The dog's behavior, the too-polished stranger with his perfect smile that never reached his eyes, the genuine fear in Nell Vale's face. He glanced at Ranger and Vesper, huddled together as if expecting to be torn apart at any moment. 24 hours, he said finally, clicking his pen closed with unnecessary force. "That's all I can give you. If you can't prove something's wrong with his paperwork by then, I'll have to enforce the ownership claim." He tucked the clipboard under his arm, his shoulders squared with the discomfort of bending rules he usually followed without question. "Thank you," Nell breathed, relief washing over her features. "I promise I'll..." "Don't promise anything," he cut her off, eyes darting toward the road where Green's expensive car had disappeared. "Just be careful. People get weird about dogs sometimes." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "If you find anything concrete, call me directly, not the office." He scribbled his personal number on the corner of a form and tore it off, pressing it into her palm. After Boone left, his truck rumbling down the street, Nell spent hours at her kitchen table, laptop open, dogs curled faithfully at her feet. The blue light of the screen illuminated her determined face in the growing darkness as her fingers flew across the keyboard, digging deeper into Rexall Green's background. Each tap echoed in the quiet house, punctuated only by the occasional sighs of the sleeping dogs. At first, nothing seemed suspicious. His breeding facility had a professional website, glossy photos of champion show dogs posed in regal stances, testimonials from satisfied clients with impressive credentials. The operation appeared legitimate, even prestigious. But as she kept searching, clicking through older articles and forum posts, Troubling, patterns emerged in the shadows behind the polished facade. A German Shepherd breeder in Ohio reported 2 of her best dogs stolen, only to spot them months later at one of Green's shows under different names and with altered markings. The police investigation went nowhere. All his paperwork appeared legitimate, and the original identifying microchips had somehow been replaced. In Tennessee, a rescue organization posted warnings about a recovery specialist matching Green's description who had seized several dogs using questionable documentation, claiming they were stolen property being reclaimed. The posts were later deleted after legal threats, leaving only broken links and vague references in other sites' comments sections. Most disturbing were the scattered comments in dog training forums, whispered warnings about missing animals, about rehabilitation programs, where dogs went in but never came out, about bonded pairs separated and sold to different buyers for maximum profit. Nothing concrete enough for police action, but enough to make Nell's hands shake as she read, her coffee going cold beside her. A notification popped up. Her landlord had emailed another warning about the eviction threat, the bold red text demanding immediate attention. Her bank account showed barely enough for groceries until payday, let alone legal fees or a security deposit on a new place. The sensible thing would be to back down, to let Green take the dogs and wash her hands of the whole mess before it cost her what little stability she had left. But then Vesper lifted her head and looked at Nell with those trusting amber eyes. Ranger pressed closer to his sister, as he always did when sensing anxiety, his large body curving protectively around her smaller form. The bond between them was so pure, so obvious. How could anyone want to destroy it? The white patch on Vesper's chest rose and fell with her breathing, a rhythm perfectly matched by Ranger beside her. Nell saved every article she could find, taking screenshots before they could be deleted, organizing evidence into folders with shaking hands. Her chest felt tight with the weight of what she'd discovered, each breath shallow and quick. This wasn't just about 2 lost dogs anymore. She had stumbled into something darker, something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden behind legal threats and polished websites. The clock on her laptop showed 3 a.m., its glow harsh in the darkened kitchen. In 21 hours, Boone would return for his answer. Nell looked at the dogs again, peaceful in their shared sleep, paws occasionally twitching in matched dreams, and knew she couldn't let them be taken. But for the first time, she truly understood what she might be risking by standing in Green's way. This man didn't seem like someone who gave up easily on what he wanted. Her phone showed a missed call from work, probably about the extra shifts she'd been promised. She'd need every hour she could get now, every dollar to fight whatever was coming. With a deep breath, Nell began organizing her findings into something she could show Boone, something that would make him understand before it was too late. She created a timeline, connecting the dots between incidents too similar to be coincidence. Outside, a car drove slowly past her house for the second time that hour, its headlights briefly illuminating her living room before continuing on. Nell pulled her curtains tighter with trembling fingers and tried not to think about what that might mean or who might be watching her now that she'd gotten in Rexall Green's way. Thunder cracked overhead, rattling the windows. Nell looked up from her research, startled by a sudden thud from the living room. The sound of panicked dog nails scratching against hardwood made her heart jump. "Ranger?" she called out, rushing around the corner. The big German Shepherd lay sprawled on his side, legs rigid. His whole body trembled violently, eyes wide with terror. Vesper circled him, whining urgently, before pressing her body tight against his chest. She laid her head over his neck, making soft sounds that seemed almost like whispers. Nell dropped to her knees beside them. "Oh God, what's happening?" Lightning flashed again, and Ranger's shaking intensified. But Vesper held steady, maintaining that close contact until gradually his muscles began to relax. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the seizure-like episode passed. "We're going to the vet," Nell decided, grabbing her keys. "Right now." Getting a 100-pound German Shepherd into her old sedan wasn't easy, especially since Vesper refused to let Ranger move without her support. But somehow they managed. The rain pounded against the windshield as Nell drove through the dark streets, constantly checking her rearview mirror to where both dogs huddled together in the back seat. Dr. Merritt's after-hours clinic was the only light on the block. The elderly vet met them at the door, rain dripping from his jacket. "Bring him straight back," he directed, leading the way to an exam room. Ranger walked shakily, Vesper still glued to his side. The fluorescent lights revealed how pale his gums looked, how labored his breathing remained. "What happened exactly?" Dr. Merritt asked, running gentle hands over Ranger's body. "The storm started, and he just collapsed," Nell explained. "He was shaking all over until Vesper—" She gestured at the smaller dog's protective stance. The vet's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Looks like a stress-induced episode. Has he shown any signs of PTSD before?" "I've only had them a few days, but he flinches at loud noises and he has nightmares." Dr. Merritt nodded. "Let's check their chips, see what medical history we can find." He ran the scanner over Ranger first, then frowned at the readout. "That's odd." "What is it?" "This registration, it's military. Ranger was a working dog, assigned to National Guard, Sergeant James Cooper." He tapped at his computer. "But Cooper died 18 months ago in a training accident. The dog should have been either reassigned or retired through proper channels." Nell's stomach clenched. "What about Vesper?" The vet scanned the other shepherd. "Her chip data's incomplete. Basic ID numbers, but no registration details, like someone deliberately wiped it." He looked up sharply. "You said someone's claiming ownership?" "A man named Green. He has papers." "Papers can be forged." Dr. Merritt's voice hardened. "But chips don't lie. This dog was military property. If he was sold or transferred privately, that's illegal trafficking." Nell watched Vesper press closer to Ranger as another thunderclap shook the building. She's helping him somehow, like she knows exactly what he needs. She probably does. Look at how they move together, how in tune they are. This isn't just companionship. She's working. My guess? She's a specialized support dog, trained to help him manage trauma responses. The vet's expression grew troubled, which makes separating them not just cruel, but potentially dangerous to his health. "The man who wants them, Green, he insists they need to be evaluated separately." Nell's voice shook with anger. He knew what it would do to Ranger. "Unfortunately, there are people who profit from acquiring and reselling working dogs through questionable means." Dr. Merritt began typing rapidly. "I'm documenting everything I've found. The incomplete chip data, the military connection, Ranger's stress response, and Vesper's intervention. If someone's trafficking service dogs—" "Can you help me prove it?" Nell asked. "I have until tomorrow to show the animal control officer something's wrong. I'll write up my medical observations and concerns. The military connection alone should raise red flags." He paused, watching the dogs. "But Nell, be careful. People who deal in illegal dog trafficking, they don't take kindly to interference." Ranger had stopped shaking, his breathing steadier with Vesper's continued presence. Looking at them, Nell felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. These weren't just strays she'd taken in. They were victims, stolen from their real purpose and sold like property. Dr. Merritt printed out his findings, adding them to the folder of evidence Nell had collected. "I'm noting that separating them would constitute a serious medical risk, given their specialized training bond. That should help with the immediate situation. The rain had eased to a drizzle when they left the clinic. In the car, Nell watched through the rearview mirror as Vesper settled against Ranger's side, ever vigilant. The big dog's eyes were clearer now, his posture more relaxed under her careful attention. These dogs weren't just lost, they'd been stolen, their bond exploited by people who saw them as nothing but profit. The realization strengthened Nell's resolve. Whatever it took, she would protect them. Thunder still rumbled in the distance as Nell spread paperwork across Dr. Merritt's desk. Boone stood nearby, his uniform damp from the rain, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Look at these discrepancies." Dr. Merritt pointed to several documents. "The dates don't match up. According to Ranger's chip, he was active military until 18 months ago, but Green's paperwork shows him purchasing both dogs from a private breeder 2 years ago." Nell rubbed her tired eyes. "That's impossible." "Exactly." The vet pulled up more records on his computer. "And there's something else. Vesper's training certification, what little we can access, shows specialized medical alert protocols. These aren't just random shepherd pairs. They were deliberately matched and trained together." Boone shifted his weight, frowning. "Green told me they were problem dogs that needed rehabilitation. Said keeping them together was making their issues worse." "He lied," Nell said firmly. "You saw what happened tonight. Vesper doesn't make Ranger worse. She helps him function. She's trained to monitor his stress levels, prevent exactly the kind of episode that happened during the storm." Dr. Merritt nodded. "Military working dogs, especially those who've experienced trauma, often have support companions. It's a sophisticated program. These dogs represent thousands of dollars in specialized training." "Which makes them valuable to the wrong people," Boone said quietly. He pulled out his phone, showing them a text. "Green's been pushing hard for me to pick them up first thing tomorrow. Says he has transport waiting." Nell's stomach clenched. "Transport where?" "He wouldn't say." Boone ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I'm supposed to just follow the paperwork, but something feels off. Way off." "Then help us," Nell pleaded. "There has to be a way to trace their real history." Dr. Merritt tapped his keyboard thoughtfully. "The military connection is our best lead. Sergeant Cooper, Ranger's handler. If we could find his family." "Already tried," Boone admitted. "Called some contacts at the National Guard base. Cooper was single, parents deceased, but..." He hesitated. "There might be someone else. His father's name came up in relation to the dogs. Caleb Harrow. Lives over in Miller's Creek." "The sawmill town?" Nell asked. "That's less than an hour away." "Different last name, though," Dr. Merritt pointed out. "Cooper was his stepson," Boone explained. "But according to my contact, Harrow was involved with the dogs' training. He might know their real story." Nell checked her watch. Nearly midnight. "Miller's Creek is what, 40 minutes from here? If we leave now..." "Nell," Dr. Merritt warned, "it's the middle of the night." "And Green wants the dogs tomorrow morning," she countered. "We're running out of time." Boone looked torn. "I could lose my job for this." "You could be enabling dog trafficking if you don't," Nell said bluntly. "Please, you know something's wrong here." The animal control officer stared at the scattered paperwork, then at Ranger and Vesper huddled together in the corner of the office. Finally, he nodded. "I'll drive. But if this leads nowhere..." "It won't," Nell insisted, though her heart pounded. "Dr. Merritt, can you..." "I'll keep documenting everything," the vet assured her, "and I'll make some calls, see what else I can dig up about Green's operation. Be careful, both of you." The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected streetlights as they headed for Boone's truck. Nell sat in back with the dogs, watching the familiar streets give way to dark country roads. Neither she nor Boone spoke much, both lost in thought about what they might find, or not find, in Miller's Creek. After about 30 minutes, Boone broke the silence. My contact said Harrow works the night shift at the sawmill. Should be able to find him there. Nell scratched behind Ranger's ears, feeling him lean into her touch. What made you decide to help? Boone was quiet for a long moment. Been doing this job 15 years. Seen a lot of strays, lot of owner disputes. But these two... He glanced in the rearview mirror. The way they look out for each other, the way you're fighting for them, makes me wonder how many times I might have missed something bigger by just following orders. They turned onto a gravel road, the truck's headlights catching the mill's silhouette against the cloudy sky. A few lights burned in the main building, and a security guard directed them to the night foreman's office after Boone showed his badge. Caleb Harrow was a broad-shouldered man with gray hair and weathered features. He looked up from his paperwork as they entered, his eyes immediately fixing on the dogs. "Dear God," he whispered. "It's really them." Ranger's tail gave a tentative wag. Vesper pressed closer to his side, watching intently. "You know these dogs?" Nell asked. Harrow stood slowly, emotion thick in his voice. "They were my sons, his partners overseas and then in the Guard, after James died." He swallowed hard. "They told me the dogs had been reassigned. I tried to track them, but the paperwork kept leading nowhere." "Someone named Green has papers claiming ownership," Boone explained, "but we found discrepancies." "Green!" Harrow spat the name. "That vulture's been trying to get his hands on military dogs for years. Calls himself a specialized reseller, more like a glorified thief." He knelt carefully, holding out his hand. Ranger approached with Vesper close behind, sniffing cautiously. Then the big dog's tail began wagging faster, and he pressed his head against Harrow's palm. "Hey boy," Harrow said softly. "Been a long road, hasn't it?" Nell watched tears gather in the man's eyes as he gently petted both dogs. "Can you help us prove they were stolen? Green's demanding they be turned over tomorrow morning." Harrow's expression hardened. "I've got their original training documents, photographs, everything. James..." His voice caught. James kept meticulous records, was so proud of what these two could do together. He looked up at Boone. "Give me an hour to gather it all. I'll make sure that bastard Green never gets near them again." Harrow's weathered hands trembled slightly as he unlocked a metal filing cabinet in the corner of his office. "It's all here. Everything James kept." He pulled out a thick manila folder and several small devices, an old phone, a digital recorder, and what looked like a military-issue tablet. Spreading the contents across his desk, he gestured for them to sit. "James documented everything," he explained, voice rough with emotion. "Said it was protocol, but really..." A faint smile touched his lips. "He just loved showing off what these two could do." Ranger lay his head on Caleb's knee, those intelligent eyes fixed upward. Vesper settled against Ranger's flank, alert but calm. The familiar scent seemed to ease both dogs' usual tension. "Here," Caleb said, picking up the phone. "James made training logs. Wanted to record their progress." He pressed play, and a young man's voice filled the quiet office. "Day 42 with the new pair. Ranger's combat instincts are solid, but the anxiety attacks are still an issue. That's where Vesper comes in." The recording continued, detailing exercises and breakthroughs. Nell listened, captivated by the warmth in the sergeant's voice as he described Vesper's uncanny ability to sense Ranger's distress before it peaked. "She's not just monitoring him," the voice explained. "She's actively intervening. Watch this." Caleb pulled up a video on the tablet. The footage showed Ranger in what appeared to be a training yard, hackles raised at a sudden explosion. Before the big dog could spiral into panic, Vesper pressed against him, using her body weight in a specific way. Ranger's tension visibly eased. It's called deep pressure therapy, Caleb explained. But Vesper took it further. She learned to anticipate his triggers, redirect his attention. They developed their own language. More videos showed the pair working in sync, Ranger clearing buildings while Vesper watched his emotional state, Vesper alerting to his stress levels during combat drills, both dogs moving as one unit. James called them his dream team. Caleb's voice cracked. Said they were teaching the brass new things about canine partnerships. He played another audio file. Day 115. Command wants to separate them for individual assessment. Told them it would defeat the whole point. Vesper's been conditioned to stay with Ranger no matter what. Even if I'm not there, that's what makes this work. Nell glanced at the dogs, understanding dawning. That's why they wouldn't be separated at the diner. Why they fight so hard to stay together. Caleb nodded. It's not just training. It's deeper than that. They complete each other, Nell finished softly. Exactly. He began sorting, through papers, pulling out official documents. Here are their original service records, training certifications, medical histories, everything Green's paperwork contradicts. Boone leaned forward, examining the files. This is solid evidence of fraud. But why would Green go to all this trouble for these specific dogs? Because they're special, Caleb said. What they can do together, it's valuable. To the right buyer. His jaw tightened. Green's been trying to get his hands on military-trained dogs for years. Sells them to private security firms, foreign contractors. But a pair like this? With Vesper's ability to handle Ranger's PTSD? That's unique. He handed Nell a thick stack of documents. Everything you need is here. Training logs, medical records, certification papers, all proving these dogs were illegally obtained after James... He swallowed hard. After we lost him. Ranger whined softly, pressing closer to Caleb's leg. The old man scratched behind the dog's ears, eyes distant. I should have fought harder to keep them, he said quietly. When they said the dogs were being reassigned, something felt wrong. But I was... He shook his head. I was too deep in my own grief. You're fighting for them now, Nell said gently. That's what matters. Caleb met her eyes. Thank you. For seeing what was special about them. For giving me a chance to make this right. He reached into the filing cabinet one last time, pulling out a worn leather collar. This was Ranger's original service collar. James kept it as a spare. He held it out to Nell. Might help remind people who these dogs really are. Nell took the collar carefully, feeling the weight of its significance. The tags were still attached, official military identification that further proved their story. I'll keep copies of everything, Caleb said, starting to gather additional documents. In case Green tries anything else. I should take pictures too, Boone added, pulling out his phone. Document the chain of evidence. As they worked, Nell watched Ranger and Vesper with Caleb. The dogs seemed more relaxed than she'd ever seen them, as if being near someone who knew their true story had lifted a weight from their shoulders. A few minutes later, Caleb finished organizing the files into a neat folder. This should be enough to stop Green legally, but be careful. His expression grew serious. Men like him don't like losing what they think belongs to them. Nell clutched the folder, feeling the responsibility of its contents. We will be, and thank you for everything. Caleb knelt one more time to say goodbye to the dogs, his hands gentle on their fur. Take care of each other, he whispered. Just like James taught you. As they walked back to Boone's truck, Nell felt lighter despite her exhaustion. For the first time since this started, they had real proof, not just of Green's deception, but of the profound bond between Ranger and Vesper, a bond that deserved to be protected. The dogs settled into the back seat, Vesper's head resting on Ranger's flank as always. Nell held the folder close, thinking of all it represented: James's dedication, Caleb's love, and the extraordinary partnership that had brought them all together on this rainy night. Rain tapped against Dr. Merritt's office window as she helped Nell fill out the thick stack of adoption forms. The veterinarian's reading glasses perched on her nose while she reviewed each page carefully, the fluorescent lights overhead reflecting off the lenses. Outside, the gray clouds had thickened throughout the afternoon, matching Nell's growing sense of unease. "Initial here," Dr. Merritt pointed, sliding another document across her desk with a practiced motion. "And here. These establish your intent to provide permanent care and acknowledge the responsibilities of ownership." Nell's hand trembled slightly as she signed, the blue ink spreading from her pen in a shaky line. The weight of what she was doing, officially challenging Green, made her stomach knot and her mouth go dry. But when she glanced at Ranger and Vesper curled up in the corner of the office, their bodies pressed together for comfort, their breathing synchronized in sleep, she knew it was worth it. Ranger's scarred flank rose and fell gently, while Vesper's muzzle rested protectively over his paw. "How long will the process take?" Nell asked, massaging her cramping fingers. "With regular adoptions, a few weeks." Dr. Merritt removed her glasses, rubbing her eyes with thumb and forefinger, revealing the fatigue lines that deepened around them. "But given the circumstances, the military connection, Green's claims, the disputed ownership, it could be longer. Much longer, potentially. We'll need to present Caleb's evidence to the shelter board and likely deal with legal objections." "Ms. Vale?" Boone knocked on the open door, his uniform slightly damp from the rain outside, holding up his phone with a concerned expression. "You might want to see this." He crossed the room, his boots squeaking against the linoleum, and showed them a local news website. The headline read in bold black type, "Local woman fights to keep fallen soldiers' service dogs together." Below was a photo someone had snapped of Nell and the dogs outside the diner, Ranger's alert posture and Vesper's protective stance clearly visible as they flanked her. "It's spreading fast," Boone said, scrolling to show comments and share counts. "People are sharing it all over social media. Lots of support for keeping them together. Veterans groups are picking it up too. Someone started a hashtag. And lots of attention from Green," Dr. Merritt added grimly, her mouth set in a tight line. "He won't like this getting public. He prefers to operate behind closed doors where his influence carries more weight." Nell's phone buzzed inside her pocket. Another text from her landlord. She ignored it, focusing on the remaining paperwork, each page seeming heavier than the last. Her fingers left slight smudges on the white paper, betraying her nervousness. "I filed the temporary custody extension," Boone said, leaning against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. "Should keep Green's hands off them while we sort this out, but—" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting hers again. "But what?" "He's been making calls, talking to shelter board members, other vets, even some local officials, spreading stories that you fabricated those military documents, questioning Caleb's credibility." Boone's voice dropped lower. "He's painting himself as the victim." Nell's chest tightened, her lungs struggling against the pressure. "That's ridiculous. We have Caleb's testimony, the original records, the photographs of his son with the dogs." "I know," Boone cut in, raising his palm to calm her. "But Green has connections, money, influence that stretches back decades in this county. He's trying to paint you as an unstable woman who stole his property, who's making up stories for attention or profit." "They're not property," Nell snapped, her voice sharp enough to make both dogs lift their heads in alert concern. "They're veterans who served their country, who lost their handler, who need to stay together, who still wake up whimpering from nightmares." Her voice broke on the last word, raw emotion seeping through. Dr. Merritt touched her arm, her fingers cool and steadying. We know that, and we'll fight to prove it. But you need to be prepared. Green will make this ugly. He'll dig into your past, your finances, anything he can use. As if on cue, Nell's phone buzzed again, vibrating insistently. This time she pulled it out and checked it, her face paling, blood draining visibly from her cheeks. "What is it?" Boone asked, straightening up. "My landlord, he's—" She swallowed hard, the muscles in her throat working. "He's giving me 30 days to vacate. Says I violated the lease by bringing in unauthorized pets. Says there have been complaints about barking." She let out a bitter laugh. "Ranger barely makes a sound, and Vesper only when she's alerting." "He can't do that without proper cause and documentation," Dr. Merritt protested, her professional demeanor cracking to reveal genuine outrage. "There are tenant protection laws. Green got to him somehow, convinced him I'm a liability, or maybe offered him something." Nell's voice shook, her hands now clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "I can't afford to fight an eviction, not with Tommy's college applications coming up and the diner barely covering bills as it is. I've been saving every extra penny for his education." Ranger lifted his head higher, sensing her distress. He patted over, nails clicking softly on the floor, nudging her hand with his cold, wet nose. Vesper followed, pressing against her leg, her amber eyes looking up with an almost human concern. Their simple gesture of comfort brought tears to Nell's eyes, blurring her vision until she blinked them back. "We'll figure something out," Boone said firmly, a new resolve hardening his features. "I know some people who might be able to help with housing. The sheriff's sister has rental properties. And the news coverage, it could work in our favor. Get public opinion on your side, maybe shame the landlord into backing down. Meanwhile, focus on the adoption petition," Dr. Merritt added, gathering the signed papers into a neat stack. "I'll testify about their health needs, their bonded status, the potential trauma of separation. Green can spread all the rumors he wants. We have facts on our side, medical evidence, behavioral assessments." Nell nodded, scratching behind Ranger's ears, feeling the soft fur and the solidity of his skull beneath. His solid presence helped steady her racing thoughts, the warmth of his body against her leg, an anchor to the present moment. She had known taking on Green would have consequences. But now, watching her careful stability crumble piece by piece, the true cost was becoming clear. "I should get to work," she said quietly, gathering the papers and sliding them carefully into a folder. "Need to start looking for a new place to live, I guess. Somewhere that allows pets, somewhere we can afford." The enormity of the task made her shoulders slump. "Come by the station later," Boone offered, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. "I'll have those housing contacts ready. And Nell?" He waited until she met his eyes. "You're doing the right thing. Don't let Green make you doubt that, not for a second." She managed a wan smile, clipping leashes onto both dogs, the familiar routine providing some comfort. As they walked out into the rain, she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down, threatening to crush her beneath it. Her job, her home, her son's future, everything she'd worked so hard to secure after her husband's death was suddenly precarious, balanced on the edge of collapse. But then Ranger bumped her hip playfully, his leash slackening as he moved closer, while Vesper pranced through a puddle, sending ripples across the water's surface, and she couldn't help but laugh at their resilience. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let Green separate them. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Some bonds couldn't be broken by money or influence. The rain began to fall harder as they made their way home, droplets drumming against her shoulders and darkening her jacket. Nell held the adoption papers close against her chest, protecting them from the weather as if they were precious artifacts. Each drop that hit her face felt like another small challenge to overcome, another test of her resolve. But with every step, Ranger and Vesper stayed faithfully by her side, matching their pace to hers, ready to face whatever storms lay ahead, both literal and metaphorical, together. The morning sun barely pierced the heavy clouds when Nell heard the sharp knock at her door. Her heart dropped as she saw Officer Chen, not Boone, standing on her porch with an official-looking document. "Transfer order for the male German Shepherd," Chen said, shifting uncomfortably. "Signed by the County Veterinary Board." Nell's hands trembled as she read the paper. "This can't be right. We have a custody extension. This supersedes that." Chen wouldn't meet her eyes. "It's for required medical testing. Something about ensuring public safety." "Medical testing?" Nell's voice cracked. "He's a military service dog. He's already been evaluated." Inside, Ranger pressed against her leg while Vesper watched intently from the hallway. The larger dog's muscles were taut, sensing the tension. "I have to take him now, ma'am." Chen reached for Ranger's collar. "Wait." Nell fumbled for her phone. "Let me call Boone, or Dr. Merritt. They'll explain. The order's valid. Please don't make this difficult." As Chen stepped forward, Ranger backed away, hackles rising. Vesper darted between them, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by fierce protectiveness. Just give me 5 minutes," Nell pleaded, already dialing Boone's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried Dr. Merritt next, hands shaking so badly she could barely press the buttons. Chen sighed, but waited, radio crackling with impatient check-ins from dispatch. After 3 agonizing minutes, Boone called back. "Nell? What's wrong?" "They're trying to take Ranger. Some kind of medical testing order." "What? There's no—" She heard papers rustling. "Hold on, let me check something." The silence stretched painfully. Then Boone's voice returned, tight with urgency. "Nell, that order's forged. Green must have—" The connection crackled. "Don't let them—" But Chen was already moving, reaching past Nell with a catch pole. Ranger bolted for the back door, which was locked. In his panic, he slammed against it repeatedly, trying to escape. "Stop!" Nell screamed. "You're hurting him!" Vesper's distressed howls filled the house as Ranger continued to crash against the door. Blood appeared on his shoulder where he'd torn the skin. His eyes were wild with terror. "Call it off!" Nell begged Chen. "Please, look at him. This isn't right." The officer hesitated, lowering the catch pole. In that moment, Boone burst through the front door, out of breath. "Stand down," he ordered Chen. "That paperwork's fraudulent. Green fabricated the board signatures." Chen backed away, face pale. "I didn't know. They told me it was routine." Nell rushed to Ranger, who had collapsed, trembling by the door. Vesper was already there, pressing close, licking his wounded shoulder. The larger dog's breathing came in ragged gasps. "I need Dr. Merritt," Nell said, fighting tears. "He's hurt himself." "Already called her," Boone replied, kneeling beside them. "She's on her way. Chen, I need you to report this attempt to use. Forged documents. Full incident report." As Chen left, Boone helped Nell clean Ranger's shoulder while they waited. The dog flinched at every touch, but Vesper's presence seemed to steady him. "I'm so sorry," Boone said quietly. "Green must have pulled strings at dispatch to get this pushed through before I could catch it. He's getting desperate." "He's getting dangerous," Nell corrected, voice hard. "This has to stop. We can't let him—" A crash from the backyard cut her off. Vesper's head snapped up, ears alert. Before anyone could react, she darted through the dog door. "Vesper!" Nell called. "Come back!" But there was only silence. Then a car engine roared to life. Ranger lurched to his feet, ignoring his injury. His howl of anguish made Nell's blood run cold. By the time they reached the yard, there was nothing but tire tracks in the mud and Vesper's collar lying in the grass. "No," Nell whispered. "No, no, no!" Ranger's cries echoed through the neighborhood, deep, desperate sounds that tore at her heart. He paced frantically, nose to the ground, searching for Vesper's scent. "I'll put out an alert," Boone said, already on his radio. "Get roadblocks set up." This was his plan, Nell realized, fury replacing her shock. The transfer order was just a distraction. He knew he couldn't take Ranger, so he took... She couldn't finish. Ranger had returned to her side, trembling violently. Without Vesper's calming presence, his anxiety spiraled. He pressed against Nell's legs so hard she nearly lost her balance. "We'll find her," she promised him, kneeling to hold him close. "I swear to you, we'll bring her back." Ranger's only response was another heart-breaking howl. The sound echoed off the houses, a cry of loss and longing that seemed to go on forever. Nell felt tears streaming down her face as she held him, her resolve hardening into steel. "Call everyone," she told Boone. "Dr. Merritt, Caleb, the news stations. I want the whole world knowing what Green did today. He thinks he can break them by taking her?" She stood, hands clenched into fists. "He has no idea what he started." As if in agreement, Ranger's howls rose again into the gray morning sky. A soldier calling for his missing partner, a friend crying out for the one who kept his demons at bay. In the distance, sirens began to wail, but Nell barely heard them over the sound of her own heart pounding with determination and rage. They would find Vesper. They would make Green pay, and they would never, ever let anyone tear this family apart again. Boone's police radio crackled in the pre-dawn darkness. His fingers flew across the laptop screen mounted in his truck, tracking the faint signal from Vesper's collar. "Got it," he muttered, squinting at the blinking dot. "She's at the old Millbrook grain depot." Nell leaned forward from the passenger seat, her hands gripping the dashboard. Ranger whined from the back, pressing his nose against the window. The depot's abandoned silos loomed ahead like giant concrete ghosts in the gray morning light. "That place has been empty for years," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Perfect spot for Green's operation." "Which is exactly why you should wait here while I check it out." Boone pulled onto a service road, killing the headlights. "This isn't a game, Nell. These people are dangerous." "I'm coming." She met his gaze steadily. "Vesper needs me, and you might need backup." Before Boone could argue, Ranger let out a low growl. Through the grimy windows of the depot, shadows moved past security lights. Men were loading cages into a waiting truck. "Call for backup," Nell whispered. "Already did." Boone checked his weapon. "But the nearest units are 15 minutes out. We need to move now if we want to catch them in the act." They crept toward a rusted side door, Ranger staying close to Nell's leg. The lock was broken, hanging uselessly from the frame. Inside, the air felt thick with dust and something else, a medicinal smell that made Nell's nose burn. "Sedatives," Boone murmured. "They drug the dogs to keep them quiet during transport." They followed a narrow hallway lined with empty offices. The sound of voices and metal clanking grew louder. Ranger's ears pricked forward, but he remained eerily silent, as if he understood the need for stealth. The hallway opened into a vast storage area. Nell's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Rows of wire cages filled the space, stacked 3 high. Inside, dozens of dogs lay still, some barely breathing, others watching with glazed eyes. "My God," Boone breathed. "This is bigger than we thought." A familiar voice echoed from above. "Load the specialty breeds first. The overseas buyers won't wait." Green stood on a metal catwalk, directing his men like a conductor. His polished shoes gleamed incongruously in the dim light. "Police, freeze!" Boone stepped out, weapon raised. Instead of surrendering, Green smiled. "Officer Carver, still playing hero?" He glanced at his watch. "Unfortunately, you're too late. In 10 minutes, there won't be any evidence left." One of his men tossed something that clattered across the floor. A flare. Flames erupted, racing along a trail of accelerant. Smoke began to fill the air. "No!" Nell screamed, but Green was already disappearing through an upper door. Ranger barked sharply, pulling toward a corner of the warehouse. Through the thickening smoke, Nell heard it, a familiar whine. "Vesper!" She started forward, but Boone grabbed her arm. "The building's not stable," he warned. "These old grain depots—" A groaning sound from above proved his point. Part of the catwalk crashed down, sending sparks flying. "Then help me!" Nell wrenched free. "She's here somewhere!" They ran between the rows of cages, checking each one as the smoke grew denser. Most held fighting dogs, bred for illegal rings. Others were clearly stolen pets, wearing tags or recovery center collars. "Here," Boone called out. "Get these cages open while I radio fire control." Nell's fingers fumbled with latches and zip ties. Some dogs stumbled out on their own, others had to be carried. The smoke was getting worse, making her eyes water and her lungs burn. Another section of catwalk collapsed with a thunderous crash. The floor shuddered beneath their feet. Through the chaos, Ranger suddenly bolted toward a stairwell. "Wait!" Nell chased after him, heart pounding. The stairwell was filled with smoke, but she could hear Vesper's increasingly desperate cries from above. "Nell!" Boone's voice echoed behind her. "The structure's failing!" But she kept climbing, following Ranger. The heat was intense now, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. Through watering eyes, she saw Ranger pause at a landing, pawing at a locked door. The whining grew louder. Vesper was just on the other side. "Stand back," she told Ranger, grabbing a piece of fallen metal. She slammed it against the lock again and again until something finally gave way. The door swung open to reveal more cages. Most were empty, their occupants already loaded into trucks. But in the last one, pressed against the bars, was Vesper. "I've got you," Nell choked out, fighting with the lock. "Just hold on, girl." The building groaned ominously. Somewhere below, sirens wailed. But all Nell could focus on was Vesper's frightened eyes and the stubborn lock that stood between them. Fresh crashing sounds filled the air as more of the structure began to give way. Through the smoke and fear, Nell kept working at the cage, knowing time was running out but refusing to leave either dog behind. They had come too far, fought too hard to give up now. "Just a little more," she gasped, her lungs burning as she struggled with the lock. The smoke was getting thicker by the second, and the heat was becoming unbearable. But somewhere in the chaos, she heard Boone's voice calling her name, and Ranger's anxious whine joined Vesper's as the building continued to crumble around them. The acrid smoke burned Nell's eyes and throat as she pressed forward, one hand gripping Ranger's collar, the other holding a damp cloth over her mouth. The German shepherd pulled hard against her grip, his powerful muscles straining with desperate urgency, driven by Vesper's frantic cries echoing through the burning building. The sound pierced the roar of flames, calling to him with an intensity that made his whole body quiver. "Easy, boy," she coughed, struggling to keep him close as her lungs protested each scorching breath. "We'll find her. I promise we'll find her." Debris rained down from above, chunks of ceiling tiles and splintered wood crashing around them in a terrifying symphony of destruction. The heat was becoming unbearable, making the air shimmer and warp like a mirage. Sweat poured down Nell's face, mingling with tears forced from her irritated eyes. Her legs trembled with each step, muscles threatening to give way, but Ranger's Unwavering determination kept her moving forward when everything in her screamed to turn back. Behind them, Boone's flashlight beam cut through the thick smoke, dancing erratically as he navigated the treacherous path. "This way," he shouted, his voice muffled by his uniform sleeve pressed against his mouth. "There's a maintenance corridor. It might still be clear." A thunderous crack split the air, the sound so violent Nell felt it in her chest. Another section of catwalk gave way above them, metal screaming as it tore free. Nell stumbled, catching herself against a wall that was hot enough to sear her palm. The metal structure crashed down mere feet away, sending up a blinding shower of sparks and embers that peppered her exposed skin with tiny burning kisses. Ranger barked sharply, the sound urgent and commanding as he strained toward Vesper's cries. They seemed closer now, but distorted and warped by the roar of hungry flames and the ominous groaning of failing metal supports. His ears pricked forward, body tense and focused despite the chaos surrounding them. "Here!" Nell wheezed, her throat raw from smoke and shouting. She pulled the damp cloth from her mouth, her own protection sacrificed as she carefully wrapped it around Ranger's muzzle. His dark eyes met hers, intelligence and understanding shining in their depths. "It'll help you breathe. We need to keep you strong." Boone caught up to them, his face streaked with soot, eyes bloodshot but determined in his weathered face. His uniform, usually so neatly maintained, was now torn and filthy. "The fire department's outside, but this place could go any minute. The structure's failing fast." He kicked at a heavy metal door, flinching as his boot connected with the surface, hot enough to feel through his thick sole. It took 3 solid strikes before the lock finally gave way with a reluctant metallic groan. The maintenance corridor beyond was narrow and claustrophobic, lined with pipes and electrical panels that clicked and hissed ominously. Smoke poured through the ventilation system in ghostly tendrils, but it wasn't as thick as the inferno they'd left behind. Ranger surged forward with renewed energy, nearly pulling Nell off her feet as hope and instinct drove him onward. "Vesper!" she called out, her voice raw and broken. Each word scraped her throat like sandpaper. "Where are you, girl? Make noise for us!" An answering whine came from somewhere ahead, high-pitched and desperate, followed by frantic scratching sounds that echoed off the metal walls. Ranger broke free of Nell's grip with a powerful lunge, disappearing into the smoke with single-minded purpose. "Wait!" She stumbled after him, one hand outstretched, using the wall for guidance even as the hot metal seared her fingertips. The heat was intense now, radiating through the corridor like a physical force, making the metal pipes burn to the touch. Every breath felt like swallowing fire, scorching her from the inside out. They found Vesper in what looked like an old break room, a forgotten space with upturned chairs and a table pushed against one wall. A fallen support beam had her trapped, pinning her back legs against the floor. Her distinctive white chest patch was barely visible through the grime and soot, but her amber eyes lit up at the sight of Ranger, relief and pain mingling in their depths. She whimpered, a sound that seemed to physically affect Ranger as he pressed forward to touch his nose to hers. "No, no, no," Nell muttered, frantically assessing the situation, her heart sinking. The beam was impossibly heavy, far too massive to lift alone, and flames were already licking at the doorway behind them, hungry fingers reaching into their temporary sanctuary. Ranger didn't hesitate. Without command or training, he wedged himself against the beam, powerful muscles straining as he pushed with everything he had. Vesper whimpered again, trying to wiggle free, her front paws scrabbling desperately against the dirty floor. "Together," Nell gasped, getting her shoulder under the beam, ignoring the pain as the hot metal pressed against her skin. "Push, Ranger, we can do this!" Boone appeared through the smoke like a ghost, his face set in grim determination. Without a word, He added his strength to theirs, bracing himself against the beam. On 3, 1, 2, 3! They heaved as one, muscles screaming in protest. For a terrible moment, nothing happened, and despair threatened to overwhelm Nell. Then the beam shifted just enough, mere inches that might as well have been miles. Vesper pulled herself forward with her front legs, scrambling clear with a yelp of pain and relief. Got her! Nell wrapped her arms around the trembling dog, feeling the racing heart against her chest. Vesper's fur was singed and hot to the touch, but she was alive, breathing in quick, shallow pants against Nell's neck. Another explosion rocked the building, more violent than the last, sending vibrations through the floor beneath them. The ceiling above them groaned ominously, dust and small debris showering down like a warning. Move! Boone shouted, his voice cracking with urgency as he shoved them toward the door. Now! This whole place is coming down! They ran blindly through the smoke-filled corridor, Nell half-carrying Vesper while Ranger pressed close to her side, his body a guide and support. The heat was overwhelming, a living thing that pushed against them, and she could barely see where they were going through streaming eyes. Her lungs screamed for clean air, each breath more painful than the last. Boone's flashlight caught a metal hatch set into the wall, its emergency exit sign hanging by a single screw, barely visible through the haze. Emergency exit! He slammed his shoulder against it repeatedly, grunting with pain and effort until it burst open with a shriek of protest, letting in a rush of cool night air that felt like salvation itself. They stumbled out onto a metal fire escape, the structure swaying slightly beneath their weight. Below, emergency lights strobed red and blue through the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the gathered vehicles and personnel. The fresh air hit Nell's lungs like an electric shock, making her cough violently, doubling over as her body tried to expel the poison she'd inhaled. They had barely made it halfway down the rusted steps when the building shuddered one final time. With a deafening roar that seemed to swallow all other sound, the upper floors began to collapse inward in a catastrophic chain reaction. The fire escape swayed dangerously, bolts pulling free from the crumbling wall. Jump! Boone yelled, his face illuminated by the hellish glow of the inferno. Nell gathered Vesper close against her chest, the dog's weight substantial but necessary, and leapt the remaining distance without hesitation. She hit the ground hard, rolling to protect the injured dog, pain shooting through her shoulder and hip. Ranger landed beside them with athletic grace, immediately circling to check on them both as the building's death throes filled the air with noise and unbearable heat. They scrambled away from the collapsing structure, a desperate crawl that became a stumbling run, not stopping until they reached the relative safety of the parking lot. Only then did Nell dare to look back at what they'd escaped. The grain depot was fully engulfed, its skeleton outlined in fierce orange flames against the night sky, black smoke billowing upward to blot out the stars. Vesper whined softly, pressing her head against Ranger's chest, seeking the comfort of his familiar presence. He curled around her protectively, his body forming a shield, both dogs trembling but alive, their breathing synchronized, a silent communication that spoke of their unbreakable bond. Nell sank to her knees beside them, her body shaking with exhaustion, pain, and overwhelming relief that threatened to consume her. Emergency vehicles swarmed the scene, their sirens piercing the night. Paramedics rushed toward them, voices calling out offers of oxygen and treatment. But Nell barely noticed them, their words washing over her without meaning. She could only watch, transfixed, as Ranger gently cleaned the soot from Vesper's face with careful, loving licks, his attention entirely focused on his companion. Their bond remained unbroken despite everything they'd endured, a testament to a loyalty deeper than training, deeper than instinct. something approaching love in its purest form. Through the chaos of flashing lights and shouting voices, a dark figure sprinted from behind the burning building. Green clutched a leather briefcase to his chest, making a desperate dash for a waiting car. "Stop him!" Boone's voice cut through the noise. 2 police officers tackled Green before he could reach the vehicle. The briefcase burst open as it hit the ground, scattering papers across the wet pavement. Green thrashed against the officer's grip, his polished facade cracking completely. "You idiots don't understand. Those dogs are my property. I have contracts. And I have everything on camera," Boone said, tapping his body cam, "including you setting that fire with animals inside." Green's face contorted with rage. "They're just dogs. Worthless mutts that some dead soldier trained. I made millions turning strays into marketable assets." "Keep talking," one of the officers said, tightening the handcuffs. "It's all being recorded." Nell watched from where she sat on the ground, her arms still wrapped around Ranger and Vesper. She felt lightheaded, the adrenaline leaving her system in waves that made her hands shake. Paramedics approached with oxygen masks, but the dogs growled protectively until Nell assured them it was safe. "Ma'am, you need medical attention," a young EMT insisted, draping a blanket over her shoulders. "The dogs first," Nell rasped, her voice rough from the smoke. "Please check Vesper's legs where the beam hit her." Dr. Merritt arrived, pushing through the growing crowd. She immediately knelt beside them, her experienced hands gentle as she examined both dogs. "Some minor burns and smoke inhalation, but nothing life-threatening. Vesper's legs are bruised, not broken." More vehicles pulled up, news vans drawn by the flames and sirens. Caleb's truck appeared, the old man moving faster than his age suggested. He carried a thick manila envelope. "Got here as quick as I could," he said, handing the envelope to Boone. "Everything's here. My son's training logs, deployment records, the original service documents for both dogs. Should be enough to prove Green's paperwork is fake." Officers were already sorting through the scattered contents of Green's briefcase. One held up a ledger, its pages filled with lists of dogs and dollar amounts. "Sir, you need to see this. Looks like he's been running this scheme for years. Hundreds of animals." "Those are private business records," Green shouted from the back of a police car. "You have no right." "We have probable cause and a warrant on the way," an officer responded, bagging the evidence. "Plus your own confession on camera. You're done, Mr. Green." Boone crouched next to Nell, his uniform covered in soot. "You okay? That was either the bravest or craziest thing I've ever seen." Nell managed a weak smile. "Maybe both." She looked down at the dogs pressed against her sides. "I couldn't let them be separated. Not after everything." "You won't have to," Boone assured her. "Between my body cam footage, Caleb's documents, and what we found here tonight, Green's operation is finished. No one's going to take them from you now." Camera flashes began popping as reporters pushed closer, calling out questions. "Ma'am, did you really risk your life to save these military dogs? What made you take on a criminal operation single-handed?" Nell just shook her head, too exhausted to speak. She buried her face in Ranger's fur, feeling Vesper's steady heartbeat against her leg. They were safe. They were together. That's all that mattered. The fire crews finally got the blaze under control, though the old grain depot was a total loss. As dawn began to break, Green was led away in handcuffs, facing charges that included animal cruelty, fraud, arson, and criminal conspiracy. Caleb helped Nell to her feet when she was finally ready to stand. "My son would be proud," he said quietly. "Not just because you saved his dogs, but because you understood what they mean to each other. That's something Green never could." Ranger and Vesper stayed close as paramedics insisted on checking Nell one last time. The dog's fur was singed and dirty, but their eyes were bright and alert. Vesper limped slightly, but she never stopped pressing close to Ranger's side. Their loyalty to each other had never wavered, not even in the face of flames. "Some people are calling you a hero," Boone said, watching the news crews pack up their gear. Nell shook her head. "I'm just someone who couldn't walk away." She scratched both dogs behind their ears, earning twin sighs of contentment. "Besides, the real heroes are right here. They saved each other. I just helped them get the chance." 3 months after the fire, autumn painted the hills in brilliant shades of red and gold. Nell stood on the front porch of her new home, a modest white house near Caleb's lumber mill. The fresh paint still carried hints of newness, matching the way her life had transformed. Inside, her accounting books lay spread across the kitchen table. Taking over the mill's bookkeeping had given her family the stability they'd needed. Her son had his own room now, and the backyard provided plenty of space for 2 energetic German shepherds. The screen door creaked, and Ranger padded out to join her, followed closely by Vesper. Their coats had grown thick and glossy with proper care. Vesper's limp had healed completely, though she still pressed close to Ranger's side whenever thunder rolled through the valley. A familiar truck pulled into the gravel driveway. Boone stepped out, looking different in civilian clothes instead of his animal control uniform. After exposing Green's operation, he'd taken a new position with the state's Animal Welfare Division. "Beautiful evening," he called out, climbing the porch steps. "Got something for you." He held out a simple leather collar with a silver tag that caught the late afternoon light. Nell turned it over in her hands, reading the engraving. "Ranger and Vesper Vale, together always." "Thought they should have something official," Boone said, "since the adoption papers finally cleared last week." Nell's eyes welled up. "It's perfect." She knelt to show the dogs, who sniffed the collar with interest. "See? Now everyone will know your family." Boone cleared his throat. "There's somewhere we should go, if you're up for it. Caleb mentioned you haven't been there yet." Nell understood immediately. She grabbed her jacket and called to her son that they'd be back before dark. The dogs jumped into the truck bed with practiced ease. They'd grown to trust car rides again, especially when they could stay together. The drive to the military cemetery took 20 minutes, winding through hills aflame with autumn colors. They parked near a quiet corner where a simple headstone stood beneath a maple tree. Sergeant David Harrow's name was etched in granite, along with his dates of service. Ranger and Vesper grew solemn, as if they sensed the significance of this place. They sat perfectly still, while Nell traced the letters with her fingers. "Your dogs are safe," she said softly to the stone. "They'll never be separated, I promise." She fastened the new collar around Ranger's neck as Vesper watched attentively. The tag clinked softly against his old service tags, which Caleb had returned to him. "Green's trial starts next week," Boone mentioned quietly. "The evidence is solid. He'll be going away for a long time." Nell nodded, remembering the fear and desperation of those days. It felt distant now, like a storm that had finally passed. "How many dogs did they end up finding?" "Over 300 across 6 states. Most have been reunited with their original owners or adopted into new homes." Boone smiled. "You started something bigger than you knew that night at the diner." "I just couldn't walk away," Nell said, watching Ranger lean against Vesper's shoulder. The female dog nuzzled his ear, a gesture she'd seen countless times. It still amazed her how they communicated without words, how their bond had survived everything thrown at them. The setting sun painted the hills in deep gold, warming the autumn air. Leaves drifted down around them, creating a carpet of red and orange. In the distance, the lumber mill's whistle marked the end of the day shift. Ranger and Vesper sat together, their shadows stretching long across the cemetery grass. They looked peaceful. No more nightmares, no more fear of separation. Just the quiet certainty of belonging. "Ready to head home?" Boone asked as the light began to fade. Nell took one last look at the headstone. "Yes," she said. "We're ready." The dogs jumped into the truck without hesitation, settling into their usual positions. Vesper pressed against Ranger's side as the engine started, and Nell saw their new tag glint in the sunset light. Together always. Not just words anymore, but a promise kept.